Welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von B. One of the more recent inductees to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is Sister Rosetta Tharpe. She was an influence to Elvis, to Jerry Lee Lewis, Johnny Cash particularly championed her influence. I believe she came up in his Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction speech. And, recently there's more and more reference to her arguably being the true first rock and roll singer. So I decided it would be fun to see if I could find any of her music on CD anywhere. And I was able to find this collection in the Toronto Public Library. And what stood out to me, don't know if you can see it out here, but is their cataloging classification, which is religious. For me, that was an interesting piece of the puzzle. When one hears the idea that Sister Rosetta Tharpe was the first rock and roll singer, one asks why she wasn't heard of until very recently. And the easy answer, and I'm sure there's a lot of truth to this, is that she was a Black woman. So she probably had a harder time being an icon, being seen as cool in the way that men were. And of course, she faced all kinds of racist, segregationist obstacles. But I think that the other huge piece of the puzzle is the fact that Sister Rosetta Tharpe sang these gospel songs. Apparently her musical journey started. She played alongside her mother, Katie Harper. She was in a church, and the funny thing is, a non-Christian person, all these church names sound incredibly generic to me, but I think they mean something very specific. So her church was called the Church of God in Christ. And from the little bit I've read about it, this sounds, like a pretty standard evangelical conservative church nowadays. They have right-wing positions on social issues, but obviously it was a Black church. And if nothing else, at the time when Rosetta Tharpe was a girl in this church, they were big on the idea of people bringing instruments to church. And as such, the guitar, an instrument primarily associated with men and increasingly with white men, was the purview of this Black woman singing religious music. And the songs she created were full of joy and energy. They were easy to sing along with, and they were played on her electric guitar. So thus, they were rock and roll, but rock and roll with a lot of Jesus. So this collection, it's called Shout, Sister Shout. You can even find it on Bandcamp. It has a lot of tracks on here. There's a disc 1 and a disc 2. The disc 2 is solo recordings, and it has some repeats from disc 1, whereas disc 1 is band stuff. So I'm just going to briefly go through the tracks on disc 1 to give you a flavor of my first experience listening to Sister Rosetta Tharpe. So the first song on this collection is called Shout, Sister Shout, and it sounds pretty different from most of the other stuff here. It has a big band arrangement, and it's still a gospel song, but the lyrics are subtle enough with this one that if you didn't hear all the other songs, you might not put together that it was a religious song. Like, the lyrics are written with a kind of cleverness that it sort of sounds like the atheist jazz standard. It ain't necessarily so. So there's a lyric goes, there's a reason for a mountain, a reason for a hill, a reason why a doctor gives a patient a pill, a reason to dance, a reason to sing, but there ain't no reason why a band can't swing. So subtly a song about saying, be grateful to God, he made all this stuff, but very easily could be interpreted as a secular song and very much an old-timey jazz kind of thing. It kind of reminds me of the song, I think it's Pennsylvania 6-500, Pennsylvania 3-500. I don't know. Track number 2 is called Rock Daniel. This one still has a bit of that big band sound, though obviously her use of the word rock, I guess, makes you in hindsight think of modern rock and roll music, and you hear her guitar a bit in the mix. Another thing that maybe made it a bit harder for Sister Rosetta Tharpe to stand the test of time is that even though if you listen to her guitar, it very much sounds like the rock and roll solos that would come a couple generations later. I mean, her adult recording career started in the 1930s. The sound on it is a bit thin. I guess by the time we got to recording the actual first wave of rock and roll music, there was this realization, the guitar is the central instrument. It should sound as good and bright as possible. Her guitar sounds a bit thinner than, say, a Chuck Berry guitar would, but the core musical elements are absolutely there, even if the production is not. Track 3 is one of maybe her most famous song. It's like the one that comes up if you look it up on YouTube. It's called Didn't It Rain? This one has a great belting chorus, and I have to assume it refers to the rain of the Noah's Ark flood. Unfortunately, it's a slightly weird version on here, so I don't think you get the most out of that song. Track 4 is a gospel song I'm sure many of you have heard of, even if, like me, you haven't previously tried to listen to gospel music. So Down by the Riverside, I'm sure you know the song. So if you can't picture it, think of the chorus. I'm gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside. But Sister Rosetta Tharpe gives it her pre-rock and roll flair with a bit of a guitar solo at the beginning. But great song, whether it's sung by Rosetta Tharpe or anyone. The chorus is interestingly worded, I'm gonna study war no more. Track number 5 is called Every Time I Feel the Spirit. It's a song, I guess, about having the Holy Spirit in you. But even though this one is a bit more churchy in its messaging than anything we've even had so far, Sister Rosetta Tharpe manages to emphasize the joyful words like moving, feel, far more than the lyrics about God. It also has a nice upbeat trumpet solo. Track number 6 is called Go Ahead, a motivational song saying God won't give up on you. Now, track 7 on this album was the real seller for me. It's called Jesus Is Mine. So the Christianity is right in your face, but it's just so joyful and so much a rock and roll song. I could almost picture singing this one myself. And this is the song that sort of both tells you, oh my gosh, yes, she was the first, or at least, an earlier than we previously thought about rock singer. But at the same time, you can absolutely see why, she couldn't be a celebrity in the way those later people were. Sure, a lot of the early rockers were Christians and they recorded gospel songs, but their secular music was front and center. Sister Rosetta Tharpe might have been controversial to some Christians. She was bringing her gospel music into the nightclubs, but Jesus was always at the center. Jesus is mine. Couldn't miss it. Track number 8, similar, centers a biblical hero. It's called Joshua Fit the Battle. And yeah, it's a upbeat number about bringing the walls of Jericho down. Reminds me also a bit of the Broadway song Hernando's Hideaway, because there's a theatrical songs quality to Sister Rosetta Tharpe's voice on this one, particularly when she whispers the pronunciation of Joshua. Joshua. Track number 9, Up Above My Head, I Hear Music. This one builds up intensity over very simple lyrics. Kind of reminds me of a sort of prototype of Jackie Wilson's Higher and Higher, but not nearly as much fun. Track number 10 is called Precious Memories. This one feels kind of like a slowed down version of a Ray Charles tune, but Rosetta Tharpe again managed to have fun jumping between singing and whispering little asides to the audience. Now, track 11 is another great one. It's called This Train. It's joyful and a bit funny, but again, arguably there's some conservative Christianity below the surface, because it's, about all the people who can't get into heaven. She says, no liars are getting into heaven. And the way she pronounces it, it doesn't sound like she's saying liars. It sounds like she's saying lawyers. It also sounds like at one point she's saying no wankers are getting into heaven, but such a joyful song, so fun to sing. Track 12 is perhaps the peak of the Christian conservatism on the record. It's called Jesus Met the Woman at the Well. It's a story of Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman, apparently found in the Gospel of John 4:26. I don't know any of this Christianity stuff, but it's her very harshly going, woman, that man you're with is not your man. Or the singer is lecturing this woman who seems to go around sleeping with a bunch of men. And who knows if Sister Rosetta Tharpe is singing this tongue-in-cheek or is actually showing her conservative side here. I think it's hard to tell. After this point, I feel like the songs started to melt into each other for me, so I didn't have any memory of Take My Hand, Precious Lord. The next one's a bit more memorable. It's called Sit Down, I Can't Sit Still, because it is a bit of a fun call and response thing going on, and also because Rosetta Tharpe manages to play with sort of different voices. Sometimes she's joyful, sometimes it sounds like she's lecturing, and it just makes Christianity sound like a big party. I just got to heaven and I can't sit down. Here it's an a cappella version of Peace in the Valley with some very faint guitar in the background. And finally, another classic and a nice uproarious one to end disc 1, When the Saints Go Marching In. Yeah, I listened to this album and I got a lot of Jesus, and I had a lot of fun with Jesus, given that I'm an atheist Jew. I guess the one thing is, if this is really all she sings about, I can't imagine listening to too much at once. A lot of rock and roll music sounds similar. And when you can't relate to the spiritual text behind it, I guess it makes it easier to get bored of. But yeah, a lot of really catchy ones on here. Shout, Sister, Shout, Jesus is Everywhere, Joshua at the Battle of Jericho, Down by the Riverside, When the Saints Go Marching In. Another part of Sister Rosetta Tharpe's story, I don't know how certain people are this, but there's certainly some belief she was lesbian or at least bisexual. So how much of a rebel she was in within Christianity, how devout she was. I don't know how easy it is to get an answer on that. Like the idiot I am, I just tried typing into Google, was Sister Rosetta Tharpe really religious? And of course, no one knows the answer. There's nothing direct. But yeah, it's interesting to go back and find that such an important influence on the development of what would come to be the rock and roll movement. Musically, she had all those elements and she was great, but a genre associated with a reverence and rebellion that it started with Black Christian music. It's really something. Signing off for me and Live Big Bon B. I will see you next time.